Welcome back to Safe Space. Our previous questions for this episode can be found here.
How has it been? How has your ministry and your kind of work, has it been well received by the church?
Well, generally there are few types of responses that we are talking from the church when you talk about society engagement and good for society. There is the group of Christians who say, well, this is worldly things, we will have nothing to do with it, and so we don't really want to support you. You can go ahead and do your thing, God bless you. There's also another group of Christians who say, well, these sort of things are a waste of time because you can spend so much time on it, it hardly bring any change. What is more important is that the spiritual atmosphere, what you call the heavens must open and continually to open in order for blessing from God to pour out. So what we need to do is to engage in the spiritual warfare, engage in prayer, have this altar, have that altar, so that at the end of the day, God's heaven will continually to be open and the blessing can flow down to humanity. So there's another group of Christians that way. Another group of Christians, of course, because of their more comfortable secular lifestyle and because they are probably upper middle class, there's a lot of indifference. These are not important things, no? As long as I come to church, have my worship, attend my cell group regularly, all things is well. All things is well, no? And we just, in God we trust, And of course, a smaller group of Christians who will say, well, we want to do this. So I would say that the responses are mixed, depending on who you talk to, depending on which leader that you engages with. But really, there's really no one answer in the sense that whether my reception has been good, cool, or very lukewarm, or is it outright rejection. It really depends on who you are engaging with at the end of this, and the responses is mixed. Having said that, I think what I would want to say is this: irrespective of the responses, I think what we need to do is to just carry on. Because if we believe that this is theological, if we believe that this is what God has implanted to the mission of the church, then I think the question here is that we need to be faithful. We need to be faithful. But as we do so, one of the things that I always caution in my mind, at the back of my mind, even as I engage with those who are not totally with us, or he wouldn't be critical with us, is I don't think it's good for us to be judgmental or condemning others. I'm reminded that in my own personal journey, as I said, I am 42 years in the Brethren Church, but it is only the last 10 to 15 years, or maybe the last 15 years, that I've come to realize this. So I'm reminded that even then, in my own personal life, it was a journey of discovery that led me to where I am. And so consequently, I also must be gracious for those who are critical or who may not be supportive. They too may have their own journey. And who knows, the day will come when they too will be able to see the like of this in their own personal journey. So I think that's the hope that I think we must bear. God is sovereign, God is working, and God will transform. Not all perhaps, but there will always be those whom he will call in their personal journey. And I think as I listen, both of us have our personal journey, and throughout our personal journey, we came to see this. Likewise, it can happen to those who are critical of us or those who are not supportive of us. Right? God is still in control.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think in terms of my own journey over the years, from a Methodist background, I think the church's practice of Methodism sort of missed the unique holiness movement of the Methodist movement, as well as its strong social dimensions of the Wesleyan movement to British society. I think that component of Methodism impacting the labor movement, the political, even actually bringing restoration to society without a kind of blood revolution, but bringing change, as a result of revival. I think that's something the church over the years has lost to a point of narrowing down Christian ministry and faith. You know. So I would say in my journey, or at least my younger years, there is an element of impatience with the church. You know. So you're part of a younger sort of activist within the church who feels that if God's calling me into the next level, you know, why should I listen to my leader? And I would just walk away and carry on. So in that process and that approach over the years, one then begins to see the church left behind in a very far way, in my own experience, from pastoral work to social work, to policy work, and now academic work. I see the essence of my faith being strengthened on a daily basis because I see it as an outworking of faith. But the church might not see it in that way because they have defined faith in very narrow sense, and they are then just taking up social concerns, maybe handouts to people. They might do some social work. They're not involved in, let's say, migrant labor reform, trade unions, which is part of the Methodist heritage. So in that sense, the church is left behind, and there is a kind of a frustration till in the last few years, in the change of my shift into DUMC, that I have found pastors who might be cautious but supportive of this intervention in society. They would pray for it. They see it as a Christian vocation. They would see Christians must be in all sectors of society, and there is the legitimate place. So there is then an application of faith, theology to contemporary issues, although the church action might not be there. Church might say, okay, talk about it, pray about it and all, but your citizens' action is outside. It's not the church doing it, but as individuals you can team up with others, but recognizing it as a legitimate expression. So I think the church over the years has moved into compassionate ministries in a very big way. So if we take most of the organized social ministries now, it's very strong. The element of justice we are seeing through civil society action and professional bodies, it's largely led by someone from a Christian background in some of the major, whether it is a professional law society or it is an activist movement. Very strong Christians are actually in the movement, working with others, motivated from a faith dimension, but seeing the need to work with others to bring restoration in society. I think there is less prayer support for such workers as opposed to if you went out as a missionary or somewhere to do church planting, then you're called up and people pray for you. But now if you say, I'm called to be in a reform movement in Malaysia, or I'm fighting for land rights, or I'm working rights for indigenous people, or I'm doing protection for sex workers or human trafficking, and that I think there are very few churches that will commission such a person, pray for them regularly. And I think those kind of changes need to come. But in the forefronts in the country, I think there are many committed Christians or Christians from different denominations in very influential position. And that's a positive light because they are associated, at least on Sundays, in cell groups. They are articulating their action in that way. Even in land rights, a lot of indigenous people in Sabah, Sarawak who are mobilizing, let's say from the SIB context, have a very strong faith dimension and they feel they need to do something in society. So I think the sort of political action, individuals might not be then saying, this is a Christian group doing, but the Christian is seeing himself or herself as an active citizen, not just as a taxpayer, but someone praying, but someone going out to do something. I've seen so many Christians in demonstrations now, in meetings, in writing, in legal litigation work, being motivated, but they are doing this as a contribution to humanity as a whole, and trying to build a better society. So in one sense, you don't have huge ministries by the churches like Society for Justice or something like that, funded by Christians, like Legal Aid or something. It's not coming out in a big way. Like I think in the Catholic side, the Jesuit priest tends to play a huge role for reform. That kind of movements within our ones have not emerged. But individuals, yes, and groups. So there are some encouraging signs, but we have a long way to go. But we have also seen a large number of Christians in politics elected. They have held responsible positions. They have been very effective on the ground, not just from a faith dimension, but being, humble, relating to people, working, and that's positive.
Okay, thank you. So I think from what I gather, what we are gathering here today is that there seems to be some disconnect between church life and public witness in terms of structural matters in society, political, whether social or economic, and the experiences of Christians who are involved in such areas, because they are informed by theology, not just because it's a job. The experiences of such individuals as the both of you can be frustrating and can also be perhaps lonely, perhaps. I think this conversation is definitely a wake-up call for me, and I hope for many Christians as well, to see the gospel from a broader perspective, from a more three-dimensional or nowadays four-dimensional perspective. But also I think, Eugene, from what you mentioned as well, that we also need to be prayerful and pray that the church can move forward on this journey to be more aware of the role that we play in society. And so I'd like to end with a question of moving forward. What kind of hope do you have? Is it a hopeful situation? I mean, does Malaysia have hope? Can Christians be a beacon of light in society? And how can the church come alongside such work?
I want to take off the point where Denison mentioned, and I think it's a very important positive point. He says that in his observation, the church as a collective unit, body, may not be, we are talking about in the context of Malaysia, may not be that actively engaged as compared to, say, in the Western nations like the States or Europe, where you have churches, you have their NGO societies are driven by Christians and churches. So we don't have that yet. But I think he mentioned a very important point that in his experience, and I would agree the last 10 years, especially during my time when I was early days when I was in NECF and now, that there are more and more individual Christians who are out there doing what they can in their personal capacity. And I think the history of the Christian church, if we look at it, has never been so vibrant in terms of the individual participation as compared to, say, 15, 20 years ago. I remember in those days after the Operation Lalang of the 87, we just celebrated the anniversary. I always tell the leaders that the church retreated as a result of the Operation Lalang. But thank God, the journey has been the last 30 years, it has come back now. Churches have now moved in terms of the individual, and I think we see some churches here and there coming forward. So that's one very encouraging point. But I also want to add this. The other encouraging point is this, that as we interact with civil society, non-Christian, we are seeing that conversely the non-Christian groups are also arising. They are not Christians, but they are also arising. And we have to take this, that God, while God is working through the church, God is also sovereignly working among wider society. And within the wider society, we see non-Christian groups are also having this movement. We see a lot of committed individual citizens who are not Christians in faith. They may be other religious persuasion, but they are also actively engaging with the Christians. So that's the second point of encouragement that I think we need to see. And I want to add that even in this respect, even we are beginning to see more and more younger generation of Muslims who are coming out to speak of some of the problems, the internal problems with their religion. They are also coming out to actually voice out the discrimination, the oppression and the injustices that are happening, that are committed in the name of Islam. So if we look at it collectively, the individual movement from the church, the individual movements from the non-Christians, in particular even the Muslim groups, and view this as a collective movement, we can see that I think God has not forgotten Malaysia, and Malaysia does have a hope. And I think we can be hopeful that in the days to come, the church as an institution, we talk about the NECF, to a large extent CCM has done that, right? The Catholic Church has a social action, but we are also hopeful that in the East Malaysia, we are seeing the Sabah Council of Churches and even the Association of Churches of Sarawak will begin to, one day, they are beginning to be more conscious, and we are hopeful that they too as an institution will come on board and start to engage on issues of public life and society. That's the hope.
Awesome. What about you, Dato'?
Okay, I would think the church as a whole suffers from this kind of minority syndrome, where they feel they are small and too small to make an impact. Failing to realize that 10% nationally is a sizable minority in the nation of 32 million, then 10% is very significant but scattered around. So if we take Peninsula, then you are seeing, at least in the Klang Valley, real mega churches that are huge in number, in resources, in the kind of people in the congregations, from all kinds of professions, influence in private sector, in academia and things like that. So the potential is untapped within the context of the church and the influence it can play. And I think that's coming out with, as Eugene and I agree, the individuals are making an impact through professional bodies, they are motivated, they are not corrupt, they want to see some change, they are motivated, hardworking, and they want to see some change in the way, and they are motivated from a faith dimension, but willing to work with anyone. So that's positive, and I think we're going to see an increased movement along that line. So if we take the mega churches, the cell groups, we take the social organizations that are all self-financed, they're not dependent on Western funding for the social ministries now. On the other side of Sabah and Sarawak, we have downplayed or not built sufficiently the size of the church in Sabah, which is over 20%, and I think Sarawak is over 30, right? 30 to 40%.
42%.
42% of the population. It's not a minority church.
Yeah, majority.
And they are majority. So, like, I'm not from the east, so I don't have the. So to go to a village and see the whole village is Christian and the church as the center of the village, and then you got a school and things like that. That kind of picture has not come out strongly, because the peninsular churches are so strong, and the majority, 60% of Christians are actually Bahasa speaking, they are Bumiputra church, and that is not a merge. So it's a tremendous potential in that light. And this is where I think John Roxborough's last writings on the history, where he then brings out that the Christian church is indigenous to Malaysia on the principle that when Sabah and Sarawak together with the peninsula formed Malaysia, the Bumiputras of Sabah and Sarawak were already Christians, So his argument is it's an indigenous church in 1963. That's part of the one. But the presentation, the recognition of diversity is not strong enough. And part of the reason is the type of clergy, the training exposure, I'm not running the East Malaysian pastors, or the leaders, but they're coming from the poorer churches, and the resources. So even in Sabah and Sarawak, the Christians who are more well-to-do are coming from the Chinese churches. So until and unless the indigenous church builds up its financial capacity, there are more professionals emerging, then you will see this tremendous influence coming from East into, and also for the churches here to respond. So we have tremendous potential, untapped potential, but for this I think the church needs to really look at academicians, church historians, economists, and it has to come from affluent families now as a vision, setting apart at least one child into one of these fields, history, economics. I mean, law, I think they're already in, accountancy, business, medicine, law, they are all in. But other fields that are needed into academic, into public service, get into PTD, and things of that sort. And I think that will make an eventual impact. And that is something we need to look at, not because we want to Christianize the thing, but we want to see that Christians have a legitimate role as citizens of the land, and we have the ability to contribute to national development, and our presence will bring corruption down. It should bring a better society that is more holy and pleasing to God. And that has to come out of outworking of faith in the public arena. And I have that hope that the church would move to that. And I think that's where we need to make sure theological colleges move in that teaching.
Okay, that's all for tonight. Thank you so much for your time. We have covered a lot of ground. We've talked about everything under the sun.
Yes.
Thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.